about 600 million people, Indians, will be living in urban areas. And out of the 600 million people, that's roughly 150 million households, which is the 150 odd million households that I mentioned in the earlier part of the conversation, which are likely to become slowly capable of buying their own home. And it's going to be requiring a huge upgradation in infrastructure to allow our cities to expand without becoming unlivable, to accommodate this kind of need for housing, workspaces, socializing spaces, cultural spaces.
I wanted to start by citing a statistic that you shared in a recent interview. You spoke about the fact that India will sell, actually Indian builders sold 550,000 to 600,000 houses in 2023. And that was a great year for real estate in India. In comparison, China, which had a bad year in 2023, sold 1.1 crore houses, which is 20 times of our sales. So that's the gap, right? And that's the so-called potential. But now, I wanted to ask you, we've been listening to people talking about this potential in almost every sector. For example, I've covered aviation for 15 years, and I've always heard that the number of planes flying in India are a small fraction of those that fly in, say, the US or even China. My question to you is, how do you see this potential, of course, going forward, and how are we fulfilling or achieving this potential? And are we sort of narrowing that gap between ourselves and the countries that we compare ourselves with when we talk about potential?
Great question, and thank you for bringing out those important numbers. I'll just take a little bit of a sort of step back to let the listeners understand where this all comes from. India has been always a low-income country, and we are now in the journey from low-income to mid-income. That journey means that people become capable of buying certain goods or services as their income grows, and that's when the consumption of those particular sectors goes up. As 10, 15, maybe 15 years ago, you started FMCG growth really expanding because people got a little richer. The first thing they bought was better soaps, better toothpaste, and so on. Then you had consumer goods growing because people were capable of buying TVs and washing machines and so on. Then you had the explosion in the entry-level cars. Then you started seeing domestic travel pick up. And now in that journey, you are seeing the fact that housing is now picking up because in the course of this decade, at the start of this decade in 2021, there were about 75 million households in India, about 25% of India's total households, which were home ownership capable. Means they could afford to buy a house, or means they would have already bought it, or they could buy a new one. By the end of this decade, that number will be a staggering 150 to 170 million households. And even that is only 45% of India's households. So in the course of 10 years, because income is at that kind of point, it was not the same growth in the last 10 years because you need a certain amount of minimum income to buy a home. So you're going to add about close to 100 million new households which are home ownership capable. And in 2021, the same year this statistic started off with, India sold about 400,000 homes. So that journey from 400,000 to 600,000 has happened in 2023. The numbers you just quoted were for 2023, where India sold about 600,000 new homes. China sold about 1.1 crore new homes in spite of it being a terrible year. And imagine if you were to compound this at 20% for the whole decade. That's a very strong rate of compounding for a 10-year period. Still, totally India can only manufacture 8 to 9 million homes, or less than a crore homes. So what India can manufacture if we were to grow at 20% for a full decade is only about 80 to 90 lakh homes, which is less than 1 year of what China consumed in its worst ever year for housing, 2023. So, 100 million homes of 100 million new families who can buy a home, maximum we can make, 1/10 of that. And therefore, the housing cycle is going to be a very long cycle, because the gap between people who want to buy a home versus the quantum of homes that India can produce is quite large.
Now, by 2036, 40% of the population of India will be living in its towns and cities, and that compares to 31% in 2011. Now, first of all, would you call this rapid urbanization, which is also a term that's bandied about quite a bit? And secondly, will our towns and cities have enough space to build houses for those 600 million people who will be shifting to these places by 2036?
So I think it's a very, very important set of numbers that you just laid out, because India's urbanization is very, very significant in terms of the impact it is going to have on how our nation proceeds, what it does to our culture, what it does to how we live, and so many other impacts it's going to have beyond just this term urbanization. In terms of whether this is rapid urbanization, I would say if you look at the quantum of people moving from rural India to urban India, it is rapid. If you look at it from a percentage perspective, it's not rapid. Close to 100 years or 90 years after independence, based on the statistic you mentioned, we'd only be 40% urban. So it's not rapid urbanization from a percentage perspective, but because our population base is so large, it is a huge quantum of people. So like you rightly said, about 600 million people, Indians, will be living in urban areas. And out of the 600 million people, that's roughly 150 million households, which is the 150 odd million households that I mentioned in the earlier part of the conversation, which are likely to become slowly capable of buying their own home. And it's going to be requiring a huge upgradation in infrastructure to allow our cities to expand without becoming unlivable, to accommodate this kind of need for housing, workspaces, socializing spaces, cultural spaces. A positive part is that India is doing this while its economy and real incomes are growing. So if salaries are compounding at 9-10% for the typical salaried worker, then it's going to give them disposable income by the time this next 10-15 year period pays out, which will enable these kind of infrastructure to get paid for. The malls can get built because people are willing to go and shop there. Sports facilities can build because people are willing to pay for membership or club or usage charges to go and play there. Because ultimately you need a fundamental economic viability of any piece of infrastructure or any piece of urbanization that you put in. So we are lucky that we are on this good economic trajectory, because this urbanization would otherwise also happen. But imagine an urbanization where we are not growing.
Abhishek, can you provide us an insight into your supermarket strategy, the genesis of this, and also its role in Macrotech's overall growth plans?
What is the supermarket strategy? Our research and independent research tells us that typically 80% of those who are looking to buy a home want to buy their home within 2 to 4 kilometers of where they presently live. They don't want to move long distances. That's because they have a social ecosystem. If they have kids, they have an education ecosystem. Often their commute to work, they are well familiar with, so they don't want to change those things. And so if you're not present within that consideration geography, then that demand is not going to come to you. It's not that because Lodha is a great developer and does the best in class product, builds the world's finest development, suddenly someone will move 20 kilometers. It won't easily happen. Only a very few will do that. And therefore, if we want to make sure that our quality of development, which we believe is by far the best in the country and on par with the best in the world, is made available to an increasingly larger number of people, then we have to be more and more present. That's like a supermarket. What does a supermarket do? A supermarket knows that it has a core radius. If you're located in a given location, within 2 to 4 kilometers of that location, people will come and buy to the supermarket. Even if you're the best supermarket in the world, it's unlikely that people will travel 20 kilometers to buy from you. They'll go to something which is more convenient to them. So that's our thought process, is that we have to be present every 2 to 4 kilometers in the cities that we are present in, which is the Mumbai region, Pune, and now Bangalore. Mumbai, of course, the supermarket strategy has advanced quite a bit more. Pune, we are starting to make it happen, and Bangalore, we are still in an early phase.
Macrotech has undertaken almost 4 fundraisings since your IPO, and you've raised more than 13,000 crores successfully from global investors and domestic institutional investors. How was this deployed, and in the context of consolidation that's going on in the market right now in the favor of larger and established developers, what kind of war chest do you think you've built, and how prepared are you for that consolidation opportunity?
Kailash, we've been very fortunate that right from our IPO, almost all of the world's most blue chip marquee investors have chosen to invest in the company and then repeatedly invest as we've raised more capital. As you said, we've raised about 13,000 plus crores over 4 different transactions, our IPO and then 3 subsequent QIPs. We believe that global investors really value the opportunity in Indian housing, but more importantly, they value execution and governance. And I think that's really what we believe sets us apart. With this, we are at a situation right now where our net debt to equity is less than 0.2 times. That's, very, very, very much in the very, very conservative and safe. We like to keep our debt to equity very low because we believe that in a real estate business, you want to keep net debt to equity. We always want to keep it at 0.5 or below. We sit on plenty of cash on hand, and therefore we have a tremendous ability to invest, not just from these funds we've raised, but because also of the fact that we generate a lot of operating cash flow. Last year, our operating cash was about 5,700 crores. This year, for fiscal 24, we're targeting about 6,500 crores. And so the company has very significant capability to scale up and invest in line with our aspirations of building the world's finest developments and making sure that every Indian family has access to a high quality home.